I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you find what I'm going to say worthwhile. This is a photo of my wife's great-grandfather, Patrick Timothy Donahue. Born in Ireland, he was a drummer boy in the Civil War. In the 1880s and 90s, he operated a steam shovel and built some of our nation's railroads. He had a crew of 8 men, and he was their captain. They were proud. They were working with cutting-edge technology. Tonight I want to talk to you about the history of some ancient Egyptian cutting-edge technology. I grew up in a family-owned highway construction business that specialized in rock construction in 6 Rocky Mountain states. Highway construction is really sculpture done on a massive scale. Here are some examples of our work and a comparison of one of our jobs to some Egyptian pyramids. This is a road at the Colony Oil Shale Project. We drilled and blasted almost every cubic yard of the rock we moved on this project. We used R50 end dumps to transport this material. These trucks are 12 feet tall, so if you stack 17 of them on top of one another, they would be as tall as the Step Pyramid. This aerial photograph shows the experimental tower on the project. It was 130 feet tall. It takes 4 of these towers to reach the height of the Great Pyramid. I started my inquiry into the way that the pyramids were built in much the same way we would bid a job. First you get the plans, then you look at the project's location. You go with what you know, so you get all the information you can, and when you visualize what can be done and how you would do it, the sophistication of your cost and simulation information, the talent of your management and crews, and the capability of your equipment and the material you assume you will have to move all come into play. You also consider your enemies. That's your competition. When you come up with your estimate, it is based on your belief of what is under the ground and what it will take to get the job done. You think about it a lot. That is where your bid comes from. You verify your assumptions when you actually do the job. I used that same process to study Egypt's pyramid building history. I have been thinking about it a lot. Here are a few thoughts seeking a home. This discussion will include what I consider to be possible inferences, apparent time-related sequences, and reasoning that I suggest are puzzle parts that I believe fit together. This is my bid. The Tura limestone quarries contain the whitest and best quality limestone in all of Egypt. For this reason, Tura limestone was used extensively up and down the Nile. These quarries have been active for almost 6,000 years. Today they contain at least 70 large underground galleries, whose total combined square footage is over 5,250,000 square feet. My respect for the quarrymen who excavated all that limestone is immense, especially when I remember the primitive tools that they used during 5,800 years of that time. The most important of all of these tools was the lever. It is the simplest tool that provides mechanical advantage. Mechanical advantage is the comparison of the force input into a tool or machine to the force output, or more simply, the ability to multiply the strength of your arm. A lever with 4 foot on one side of the fulcrum and 1 foot on the other side had a 4-to-1 mechanical advantage. If a workman pushed down with 100 pounds of force, the lever could lift 400 pounds. If the fulcrum was moved only 6 inches, the mechanical advantage ratio becomes 9-1. So the same 100 pounds force can now lift 900 pounds. A lever system is scalable. If one lever can lift 1,000 pounds, then two can lift 2,000 pounds, and four can lift 4,000 pounds. And 100 of these same levers could lift 100,000 pounds. Hieroglyphics were invented between 5,350 and 5,200 years ago. I suggest its inventors were highly impressed with the mechanical advantage technology, and they used a silhouette shape of each part of the mechanical advantage machine as symbols in their hieroglyphic writing. During the pre-dynastic times, burials were made in pits. In time, these pits got deeper. At some point, the need to lift the material excavated from the bottom of these pits were met by a machine that could lift excavated material both safely and rapidly. I propose that machine was a man-powered system that I call a mechanical advantage machine because it utilized levers. The critical element of this machine is the use of Prusik knots. This is a type of slip knot that grips under tension and slides when slacked. This knot allows the levers to be reset, to lift repeatedly, quickly, and safely, again and again. W.M. Flanders Petrie's two classic books, Tombs 1 and 2, have illustrations of the objects he found when he re-excavated the first and second dynasty royal tombs at Abydos. A generalized silhouette of every single part of the mechanical advantage machine is displayed, carved, or scratched on many of the items Petrie found. The following is a list of the mechanical advantage machine's parts that we found in Petrie's two books. The was, often called the was scepter, is translated as power and dominion. This tool is the lever in the mechanical advantage machine. The hieroglyph, meaning mountains and mountain peaks, is what I call a rocker top. The Egyptians believed that the heavens were made of iron and were held by a cosmic mountain with two peaks between which the Nile flowed. The craftsmen who used the rocker top viewed the was lever lifting great weights, and the rocker top reinforced that was lever, like the mountains that held the incredible weight of the heavens. The ankh means life. The was lever is inserted in the loop of the ankh and pumped in a manner that the ancient Egyptian craftsmen equated to the motions necessary for the creation of life, which, like mechanical advantage, is a gift of the gods. The throne of Isis' hieroglyphic meaning is seat or place. It is a fulcrum on which the rocker top hinges. It is the stable seat or place that holds the force and power. The cartouche meaning is in circle. It was used to form Prusik knots that surrounded and locked onto the mechanical advantage machine's lifting rope. The hieroglyph that Sir Alan Gardner calls federer means raise, support, and seize. Petrie has 11 pages in his book Tombs 1 that may be crude attempts to indicate lifting ropes. He also includes many photos and illustrations of federer. The federer may have been connected to the bottom of these lifting ropes. The hieroglyph called hobble means protect or guard. This figure is a shaped rope that, as used in the mechanical advantage machine, holds the federer ropes so they don't wander and allow the load being lifted to get loose or spill. This would protect the workers excavating the pit below. The early Egyptians may have thought of the mechanical advantage as a gift of the gods. That is a reason we see Egyptian gods carrying ankhs and wasp scepters. These tools were used to display the power of the gods. In March of 2013, French Egyptologist Pierre Tillet found a stash of the oldest papyrus ever found in Egypt. They contain a very sophisticated communication and recording system. It must have taken hundreds of years to develop. See, it even looks like a modern spreadsheet. I suspect this system was originally developed by Tura quarrymen so they could coordinate projects up and down the Nile. Their expertise, given as informal advice and counsel, may have formed long-lasting relationships with other talented craftsmen. I believe this system helped the Tura quarrymen develop not only the underground quarries at Tura and Messara, but also a multitude of excavation-oriented projects, possibly including 44 other quarries and 6 mines along the Nile. Essentially, the best craftsmen worked at the top quarry, and they advised and coordinated many, if not all, other similar projects. Mirror, the author of the oldest papyrus found to date, describes men that Khufu knew by name, just as any successful king would. The pharaohs would talk directly to men of great knowledge when they needed their advice, men like the leaders of the Tura quarries, who were involved in a multitude of projects along the Nile. Early projects would have included the 3 2-ton colossi statues of men at Koptos and mastaba shaft tombs. Later, when the Second Dynasty kings Hetep-Sekhemwy and Nai-Netcher tunneled underground labyrinths that were cumulatively over a mile long, they must have used the talents of men from the Tura quarries to accomplish these massive sculptures. The King's List on the Palermo stone states that the last pharaoh of the Second Dynasty, Sekhemwy, built in stone. Stone went from being only a part to the whole of an architectural structure. A truly significant question is, who trained men to excavate these tunnels and remove the excavation they produced? The quarries at Tura and Messara may have existed almost 6,000 years ago. The empathy and acumen of a craftsman to train novices is truly an art. The soft hand of a craftsman's demonstrated skill, knowledge, and experience, and the response of a novice of interest and respect can form an everlasting union that, when used to enlist large numbers of recruits, can perpetuate an endeavor well into the future. Multiple repetitions of these tactics through thousands of both years and novices may be the key to Tura's longevity and its facility to enable the creation of larger and more complex projects. The pharaoh Djoser employed Imhotep to build his Finery complex. Imhotep must have brought with him the philosophy of Tura. It was probably part of his soul. That must have been what gave him the capability to create the monument Djoser required. Djoser's monument, temples, and enclosure walls, as well as the 3.5 miles of tunnels with their vertical material removal shafts and the 2 100-foot deep by 25-foot square shafts, each with granite burial vaults at their base, all required craftsmen of great skill to put them in place. Imhotep was brilliant, but in coming from Tura, he must have used their systems and training techniques to create the craftsmen he needed out of the farmers that would have come from Egypt's nomes. That was the reason for the creation of some of the facilities in Djoser's complex. The south tomb which is almost a clone of the tomb shaft under the step pyramid, was not only a location used for training, it must have also been a proof of concept facility. Even the granite burial vault at the bottom of its shaft is almost a duplicate of Djoser's real burial vault, now under the step pyramid. That is a lead-in to a very interesting question. How did they get all those granite beams to the bottom of the shaft? The answer? They dropped them. It was at the south shaft that the workers learned how to move the many-ton granite beams, not only above the shaft, but in the tight space at the bottom of the shaft. The shaft under the step pyramid is the most interesting of the two. The top of the shaft was constructed as a staging area to place all the granite beams on a ledge. Approximately 90 feet down, there was a 4 or 5 foot thick layer of hard limestone. It ran beneath the entire area. The room that was constructed at the shaft's bottom was roofed by this hard layer of limestone. After all of Djoser's burial vault's beams had been moved and placed around the top of the large shaft, the beam delivery was initiated. All at the same time, the workmen released the 421,000 pounds of granite beams into the pit. That would have been like dropping a freight train in a 100-foot deep hole. When the granite hit the hard limestone layer, the limestone was pulverized with a bang. When the dust cleared, the assemblage of granite beams was sorted out and then constructed into Djoser's burial vault. The shaft was then covered with a mastaba-like building that became the first stage of Djoser's step pyramid. Imhotep finished the rest of Djoser's monument by using another version of the mechanical advantage machine. He essentially lifted the fulcrum-topped Lincoln log stacked cribbing above the ground, leaned these structures against the side of each of the pyramid steps, and turned them into towers that could lift all of the monument's blocks. Groups of these towers were placed along the sides of the pyramid steps and used in much the same way as they were used to lift excavated material out of the deep vertical square shafts that are under the step pyramid. The cost of training the step pyramid's craftsmen and generating all the materials used to create the monument was more than paid for by the massive improvement in Egypt's economy. When the farmers who came from all over Egypt were sent back home, they returned as trained craftsmen. What they had learned so massively improved their knowledge, productivity, and capability that it caused Egypt to bloom. The result was a multiplication of Egypt's wealth, and that was the justification for Djoser to increase the size of his monument. It went from a one-step structure to a 4-step pyramid, and then finally to the 6-step pyramid we see today. Almost all of this was the result of the training that was initiated by Imhotep. With this came a pride created from the knowledge and experience the workmen garnered by constructing Djoser's step pyramid. The result was to solidify and unify Egypt and cement in place the allegiance of Egypt's population to their king. The next 2 pyramids were never completed, nor did they ever achieve any significant height. However, in their ruined state, it is possible to see that they were constructed with accretion layers. This is almost the signature of the tower fulcrums used in the step pyramid. We don't think any type of ramp system could have been used that would have allowed pyramid builders to efficiently place blocks in accretion layers. This is a visualization of the order in which accretion layers may have been placed in the step pyramid. The 4th pyramid was built by the pharaoh Huni at Meidum. This animation is based on his 8-step structure. However, this pyramid was never completed, possibly due to inherent and structural weakness within its design. The pharaoh Sneferu built the Bit Pyramid, which also appears to have experienced design problems and was not completed as a true pyramid. Next, Sneferu built and completed the Red Pyramid, so named because of the red tint of the limestone that was used to construct it. This pyramid did not experience the same structural problems of its predecessors, presumably because the use of accretion layers was abandoned and the blocks were laid flat. If the construction blocks for a pyramid are lifted up the face of that pyramid, as the top levels of the pyramid gets narrower and narrower, the number of paths to the top declines, and thus fewer workers are needed. A good manager likes to keep his trained workers busy and keep their skills sharp by utilizing their talents. As the Red Pyramid proceeded towards completion, the Medum Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid stood incomplete. As workers at the Red Pyramid became unneeded, they were shuffled off and sent to finish the Bent and work on encasing the pyramid at Medum. They were oddly successful with the Bent, but for some reason did not finish Medum. Subsequent pharaohs seem to have found work on a variety of projects for their base of skilled workers. They kept cadres busy on a variety of projects. These included the excavation of canals and harbors, which simplified the boat delivery of men and materials to selected areas. Others were involved in building a mortuary, valley, and sphinx temples. Still others created massive or fine statuary, or even paved selected grounds with basalt blocks. Trained workmen were kept busy and well taken care of. The Red Pyramid is 3 beautifully polished corbelled chambers. The passage that leads to the third chamber is located 26 feet up on the south wall of its second chamber. I remember walking in the Red Pyramid and then through this passage and thinking, isn't it nice of those ancient builders to finally make a passage 6 foot 4 inches high? A passage I didn't have to crawl through, one that I can walk through, almost standing up. Sneferu's burial chamber was at the end of that passage. It is a big ragged hole now, but it once contained Sneferu's granite burial vault. When I walked back through that passage, I noticed chisel marks on either side. They were proof that the pharaoh had the original passage deepened almost 3 feet. That caused me to ask, why did they do that? Now I believe I know why. After the Red Pyramid was finished and Sneferu was gone west, his mummified body needed to be placed in his waiting burial vault. That vault was located under the floor of the upper third chamber. I remember as I came out of the third chamber, I saw 3 beam holes on either side of the second chamber's corbelled ceiling. They were almost in line with the bottom of the passage I was exiting. These holes had contained the beams that supported the platform on which the mechanical advantage machine resided. That was the machine that lifted Sneferu's sarcophagus up to his granite burial vault. Sneferu and his builders evidently believed that he would be safe if his sarcophagus was surrounded by granite blocks, and the passage leading to his burial chamber was filled with plug blocks and camouflaged, but their concept of safety was unreal. Khufu probably started work on his pyramid shortly after his father Sneferu had died. He would have had at his disposal a large number of experienced craftsmen who had worked on his father's pyramid. They were trained, capable, ready to go, and always well taken care of. This would have given him the ability to start many projects almost at once. In order to create his pyramid, they needed to organize transportation facilities that could accommodate the project's food, materials, manpower, and supply needs. Build a village for the workmen to live in. Level the pyramid's foundation and align the pyramid with true north. Create and teach the project's craftsmen how to operate its mechanical advantage equipment. Advise the Red Sea copper mines to start sending the material that would be used to create most of the tools. And excavate the underground tunnel and burial chamber. They also needed to open the local quarries and begin the process of supplying the pyramid's interior stone. And with that, they had to advise the Tura and Masar quarries to start sending facing stone. They had to excavate canals and a harbor at Giza so supplies could be delivered directly and quickly to the pyramid site. When Khufu revised his pyramid design, they had to advise the quarry at Aswan of his granite needs. The pyramidion, or capstone, was the first stone placed within the perimeter of the pyramid. It was positioned at the pyramid's exact center, in line with its final position atop the pyramid. This way they could survey off the capstone for each level. A mechanical advantage machine was then used to lift the capstone high enough to slide one of the first level's construction blocks under it. All the blocks in that construction level were then placed from its center out to its sides. With each new construction level, the capstone was first lifted so the first blocks of that level could be placed under it, and again all the blocks in that construction level were then placed from the center out to the level's edge. This procedure was repeated for each construction level. As a result, the capstone moved vertically up the exact center of the pyramid, all the way to the pyramid's top. Thus, the first stone placed in the pyramid was the first stone put in its final location at the pyramid's top, just as Herodotus had said. About the same time that the first construction blocks were being placed, construction of the descending passage down to the subterranean chamber was also beginning. At the very bottom of the passage, there is a lip that surrounds that passage. This lip was to be used to stop and support plug blocks. The long descending passage was to be filled all the way with plug blocks. They were to protect Khufu's burial chamber from tomb robbers. However, the subterranean chamber was clearly abandoned. It was never completed. Underground water sources have been found in and around the Giza Plateau. We believe that when this chamber was being excavated, its workmen hit a perched water table that caused Khufu's subterranean burial chamber to flood. Verses from later Greek and Roman writers suggest that this was the case. The entrance to the well shaft is almost 23 feet up from the bottom of the aforementioned lip at the base of the sloping descending passage. The floodwaters filled the subterranean chamber to its roof. That was the reason that the subterranean chamber was unsuitable for a royal burial. At approximately the same time that the subterranean chamber flooded, I suspect someone attempted to penetrate into Khufu's father's tomb. Too many people knew where Sneferu's burial chamber actually was. The two catastrophes caused Khufu to rethink his burial strategy. He recognized that he had to use a brilliant deception. Khufu's burial location could only be safe forever if it were not only hidden, but also placed where no one would look for it. That could only happen if a great diversionary deception was created that was so magnificent that it would actually hide his burial chamber. In addition, that deception could only work if his burial chamber were created in a completely clandestine manner. Only in that way could he have the safest burial location possible. When Khufu heard that an effort had been made to penetrate his father's burial chamber, he knew that someone would eventually reach Sneferu's hidden coffin if he didn't do something. The solution was to bring his father to the safest place Khufu knew of, his own secret burial chamber, a chamber that was not yet built. In order to remove Sneferu's sarcophagus from his granite burial vault, all of the previously assembled scaffolding at the top of the Red Pyramid's second chamber had to be reinstalled. In addition, the process of removing Sneferu's sarcophagus from his secret burial chamber was made more difficult by the fact that the armoring granite that surrounded Sneferu was impenetrable from above the floor of the secret chamber. The solution was to lower the floor of the passage leading to the secret chamber by almost 3 feet. The floor at the end of the passage had to be excavated down another foot in order to get the levers under the first granite block. Once the first block was levered up, ropes were tied to it so additional levering could accomplish raising it up and out. After the first granite block was out, the rest of the blocks could be removed. As each block was lifted, it was pushed down and out the passage's entrance. There it was dropped almost 22 feet onto a pile of gravel under the passage's entrance. The gravel was placed there to prevent those special granite blocks from chipping each other or being damaged by the fall. The lowering of the bottom of the passage required a reconfiguration of the mechanical advantage equipment in order to bring Sneferu's sarcophagus to the floor of the second chamber. As a result, all the machines supporting workmen had to squeeze into a work area that was just over 4 feet wide in order to lower Sneferu's sarcophagus to the chamber's floor. The essential components of the machine were still there, but the arrangement of the mechanical advantage machine proved it could be very versatile. Once Sneferu's sarcophagus had reached the floor of the second chamber, it was pulled up and out of the entrance of the Red Pyramid with more mechanical advantage equipment. Sneferu's sarcophagus was then taken to a secret location to await the construction of Khufu's burial chamber. On March 9th of 1925, a member of George Reisner's group found a deep shaft just over 400 foot east of the Great Pyramid. It contained Khufu's mother, Hetepheres of First Burial Goods. Her sarcophagus was also found, but Hetepheres was not in it. Reisner suggested that this was a secret reburial and that it had been caused by robbers who had stolen her from her original tomb. The reburial, Reisner had postulated, was done in secret by priests who did not want to tell her husband Sneferu that her body was missing. It was an interesting speculation, but I suggest that she may be with her son and husband in Khufu's hidden burial chambers under the Great Pyramid, protected by a great deception. With the abandonment of the water-filled subterranean burial chamber, Khufu redesigned the interior of his pyramid and relocated his burial chamber in a far more secure location. As soon as the subterranean burial chamber was abandoned, the workmen at the construction level recognized the water it contained was the closest water available. They then decided to dig a shaft from the edge of that water to their existing construction level. This is what created the well shaft. As the construction levels ascended, access to the water was maintained through a square shaft that was raised up each time the construction level went up. It was finally terminated to the side of the bottom of the Grand Gallery. It was probably good drinking water. and was hauled up and out of the well in water bags. The water may have been available to the pyramid's construction crews for many years. Once created, however, the well shaft became a tool of Khufu's planned deception. Once the subterranean chamber was flooded and then abandoned, Khufu created a new plan. He would create major facilities in the upper part of the pyramid. Access to them started by tunneling into the top of the descending passage about 93 feet down from what would be the pyramid's entrance. The lower half of the ascending passage was made by tunneling through existing in-place blocks. The upper half of that passage was framed by the pyramid's ascending construction blocks. The Queen's Chamber was built as an emergency burial chamber for Khufu. It would have been used if he had died before the pyramid was completed. The Grand Gallery was the next component of Khufu's deception. The trough down the center of the Grand Gallery was created to inventory the plug blocks that were to be used to plug the ascending passage once Khufu was interred in his burial chamber. 5 large holes were placed in the side walls in front of the entrance to the Queen's Chamber. These were where strong wooden beams and a long wood plank was going to be installed that would bridge that entrance and support the 2 lowest plug blocks inventoried in the Grand Gallery. Anchoring sockets were placed up the right and left walls of the Grand Gallery. 1 pair for each of the 25 plug blocks that were installed during construction. Above the Grand Gallery, hard Aswan granite was used to create and armor the antechamber and the King's Chamber. 3 Aswan granite portcullis doors and 2 stacked granite leafs were also installed in the antechamber. The 3 granite doors would later seal the entrance to the granite-encased King's Chamber. The number of long 70-ton granite beams used to create the King's Chamber's roof and the 4 granite-roofed relieving chambers was enough granite beams to have created a corbelled ceiling over the King's Chamber. That was probably the professed original plan, or that may have been the story that Khufu's overseers were told. However, Khufu recognized that as soon as the King's Chamber was roofed over and the roof of the Grand Gallery closed, there would be no reason for any unauthorized person to enter the pyramid's original entrance and go down its descending passage. Absolute secrecy would then be possible, and work could begin on the entrance to Khufu's true secret burial chamber. There are rectangular discolorations on both ends of all of the granite ceiling beams in the King's Chamber. They were made by freshly cut Lebanese cedar timbers that were used to help move the 70-ton granite beams across the King's Chamber's ceiling. At least 4 fresh Lebanese cedar timber beams may have been used to help move those chamber-spanning granite beams into place. The immense weight sitting atop fresh timbers may have forced the timber's sap to leave imprints next to the King's Chamber's walls. These are the rectangular discolorations that we can still see today. When the last of the granite ceiling beams closed the top of the chamber, these 4 long timbers were quietly left inside. These long cedar timbers were later moved through the antechamber under the 3 propped open granite doors and into the Grand Gallery. Everything was there in place to keep Khufu's burial chamber secret. Possibly even necessary ropes, levers, and animal fat tallow had been left behind. All that was necessary then was to secretly dig Khufu's secret burial chamber out from under the bottom of the descending passage. We have prepared the following video to show the next step in Khufu's planned deception.
The Great Pyramid was constructed more than 4,500 years ago, with an interior design unique to all Egyptian pyramids. In the year AD 820, the Caliph al-Mamun's men tunneled past 3 granite plug blocks, barring the entrance to the ascending passage. They found the corridor beyond filled entirely with limestone plugs, which they demolished and removed to clear the passage. This passage opened to the magnificent Grand Gallery, which led to the granite-lined antechamber, where they found 3 granite doors. Unable to dig around the hard granite doors, they had to break through each door with great force and effort. Once entry was gained to the so-called King's Chamber, they found the room only to contain an empty granite sarcophagus. Returning to when the pyramid was still under construction, these passages were necessarily left open to permit access for the workers. Holes in the walls at the low end of the Grand Gallery clearly show that a sturdy wooden floor was placed over the entryway to the Queen's Chamber. The first plug blocks were housed on these planks before they were used to close the passage below. The plugs needed fresh lubrication to be able to slide into place. Lubrication most likely would have been achieved with an animal fat tallow. These plug blocks would have sat idle for at least 10 years while the construction of the pyramid was completed. During this time, the animal fat would have rotted and lost its lubricating ability. The doors in the antechamber, before the King's Chamber, would have been propped open using wooden posts to allow workers access during construction. However, once the pyramid was complete, the time came to slide the plug blocks into the ascending passage. Fresh lubrication would need to be reapplied to allow the blocks to slide the full length of the ascending passage. A huge A-frame was constructed within the Grand Gallery. The walls were constructed to accommodate this machine. Anchor points were designed to secure the A-frame and allow it to pivot along a set angle. Specially designed scaffolds were erected to manage the heavy rope attached to the top of the A-frame. The rope connected to the doors within the antechamber, which acted as counterweights. Levers were tied to the leaf block to control the transfer of forces between the heavy A-frame and the counterweights. A system of pulleys, ropes, and levers completed the counterweight machine. A sturdy rope attached the massive plug to the A-frame. Levers pulled the block forward to suspend the block from the rope. With the rope taut and the block suspended, levers could be used to lift the counterweights. The leaf block would be raised to allow the ropes to slide and lowered to secure the ropes and allow the levers to be readjusted. As the counterweights were raised, the A-frame would tilt forward and the plug block would move forward. The distance between the plug block and the floor would become sufficient for workmen to apply the lubricating agent. The counterweights, although closely matching the weight of the plug blocks, were heavier, so that when the leaf block was released, the unsupported doors would close, returning the freshly lubricated plug back to the floor of the Grand Gallery. The block was then ready to be slid into the passage below. Once the ascending passage was completely filled, the wooden floor was cut into pieces and removed down the well shaft, as were all of the recyclable components of the A-frame and counterbalance machine. With the counterbalanced doors sealing access to the king's chamber, the leaf block was broken in half. The brilliant mind who designed this system knew that without this integral part, the machine could not be reassembled and used to raise the granite doors, essentially locking the doors in place. And for the next 3,000 years, the Great Pyramid sat with the ascending passage filled with plug blocks, denying that access to the chambers above.
As you can tell, we put a lot of time and thought into this project. We had a three-dimensional print made of the upper half of the Grand Gallery and the antechamber. This included their plug blocks and counterweights. This helped us figure out the rope configurations and knots that the builders originally used. This is an ongoing investigation that requires updates and refinements. The system of counterweights used to balance the A-frame and plug blocks use crude pulleys, ropes, and men with levers. But using this long lever to lift the counterweights was not satisfactory and was too constrained. There had to be a better solution. Of course, the person responsible for the design had a solution and left us a clue. These two holes had to have a purpose. These sockets supported a large beam that was tied into the system and connected to more men with levers. These levers were attached to the ropes with the same Prusik knots used in the mechanical advantage machine discussed earlier. If each man could produce 100 pounds of pull, it would require 16 men to easily lift the 17,000 pounds of counterweights. Pulling these levers would be much like rowing a boat on the Nile River for these workers. Once the plug block was lifted off the ground and lubricated, the men in control of the leaf block would then lift this weight and release the brakes on the ropes, lowering the counterweights gently to the ground. The plug block could then be untied from the A-frame and slid down the ascending passage. Much like walking a modern refrigerator, the A-frame could then be walked up the Grand Gallery. To the next set of axles and be prepared to lift the next plug block in line. The A-frame was essentially the center of the counterbalance machine used to lift and lower the plug blocks. The two sides of the machine closely balanced each other once the plug block was swung into action. The plug blocks were made to balance the three door counterweights and also to fit in the Grand Gallery. But only 23 of the 25 plug blocks were needed to fill the ascending passage. The question then is, what did they do with 2 extra plug blocks? We have a clue from the Edgar brothers, who worked inside the Great Pyramid in 1909. In their book, Great Pyramid Passages, they say, quote, "For the first 78 feet or so, the center of the floor is hewn and worn with a series of irregular trenches," end quote. Most of the length of the descending passage has been eroded by the occasional rain events over thousands of years. However, there is an anomaly in the floor right beneath the entrance to the ascending passage. Quote, "At this place, The floor of the descending passage is composed of such hard limestone. For a length of about 10 feet, the surface is so smooth that to walk on it is impossible." End quote. If you want plug blocks to stop, a lip around the passage walls is most effective. But that didn't happen. We believe that the two missing plug blocks were meant to slide into the descending passage. A wooden beam was set in holes dug on either side of the entrance to the ascending passage. The beam was located there to hold the lowest granite plug block. Cement is visible around the sides of the plug block. Once the cement was hardened, the wooden beam was removed. In 1997, my son Jim found the first of 4 scratched lines on the walls of the descending passage. They were in line with the ascending passage, and each traversed one of its bottom 4 corners to the floor of the descending passage. Jim, my oldest son Rusty, and Dr. Mark Lehner were there when the discovery was made, and Dr. Lehner suggested that the initial line Jim found, quote, was old, end quote. On returning the next day, we found that they were really 4 lines, and they extended from the 4 corners of the ascending passageway opening down the 2 walls of the descending passage to its floor. We believe these 4 lines were used to help the Egyptian workmen conduct the 2 extra plug blocks into the entrance to Khufu's secret burial chamber. The work of creating the tunnel and burial chamber could only be entrusted to completely trustworthy tunnel craftsmen who had been specially chosen. The disposal of excavated materials generated from their tunneling activities and the movement of personnel of needed materials into and out of the project could only have occurred at night. The creation of Khufu and his parents' burial chamber had to be done in total secrecy. The following is an explanation of the process that was used after Khufu and his parents had been interred to insert the 2 very hard stones, plug blocks, into the floor where the Edgar brothers said the floor was impossible to walk upon. When first placed in the descending passage floor, these plug block stones would have been indistinguishable from any of the other floor stones. But after thousands of years of water erosion, uniqueness and the quality of the stones caused them to wear very differently. In fact, in this picture, you can see the corner of one of those plug blocks. The last step in Khufu's deception plan was to conceal the ascending passage's cemented-in granite plug block with a specially shaped stone called the prismoidal stone. It was to go under the plug block, blend into the descending passage's ceiling, and camouflage what was above. The prismoidal stone was transported from the base of the pyramid to its entrance with mechanical advantage equipment. Once in the descending passage, ropes and levers were used to pull the prismoidal stone down the passage without the use of any lubrication. The scribed lines that were found on the walls of the descending passage may have been helpful in aligning and placing the prismoidal stone. As soon as the stone was prepared and properly aligned, levers were used to lift it into place. Placing the prismoidal stone would have required the placement of cementitious material on 4 of its sides, and then holding it in place until the cement set. That stone may have been blocked and held in place for possibly a month to let the cement completely cure. The workers who brought the prismoidal stone in and placed it in the bottom of the ascending passage would never have known that Khufu's true burial chamber was right under their feet. All evidence of it would have been carefully concealed and obliterated. I have often wondered whatever happened to the priests and members of the elite class who actually knew where the secret burial chamber was. I really don't know. Whoever knew and was still alive would have recognized that the true burial chamber was almost impossible for any intruder to surreptitiously achieve forced entry. In addition, who would have known that silence was the best guarantee of their longevity. Besides, for them silence was probably very well rewarded. Khufu's great deception was based on his belief that diverting the attention of any intruder and encouraging him to look where Khufu was not to be found was the best protection he could achieve. Thus far, Khufu's great deception has worked perfectly for more than 4,500 years. The most brilliant part of Khufu's plan was to get intruders to look for him in the upper part of his pyramid. That part of the deception would start as soon as the prismoidal stone came loose and exposed the granite plug block. Once that happened, the interest of any intruder would have been diverted, and his curiosity would have caused him to only look up and never look down. He would have expected to find treasure up above the granite-plugged entrance to the ascending passage, because effort increases interest. Once the intruder had expended the energy necessary to remove the large number of plug blocks in the ascending passage, and then entered the incredible facilities of the Grand Gallery above, he would never have looked under the descending passage. That diversion of any intruder's interest would have made the cost of extensive facilities above the descending passage all worthwhile. Khufu's incredible deception has so far prevented any intruder from looking where Khufu and his father Sneferu and possibly his mother Hetepheres I really are. The Great Pyramid, and in fact all of Egypt's kings' monuments, gained their reputation not only from the way they looked to those who marveled at the excellence of their composition, but also for what they did to those who created them and the economies that their craftsmen enhanced. They gave Egypt the capability to display forms of excellence that had never been seen before. And as Dr. Boast, my history teacher, for 27 years said, you have a great advantage when you know what excellence is. All this was made with the realization and the divine power of mechanical advantage. And it was founded by a simple lever. Truly a gift of the gods.